I never imagined a simple trip to the grocery store would end with police sirens echoing down my own quiet street. It all started with a demand, not a request. A teenager, emboldened by a staggering sense of entitlement, decided the groceries in my hand belonged to him. When I calmly refused, his mother, the neighborhood's self-appointed queen, emerged, her face a mask of pure fury. She didn't see a neighbor, she saw a target. She made accusations, her voice dripping with venom, and then she made the one call she would forever regret. She had no idea that the very system she was weaponizing against me was the one I commanded. How could she possibly know she had just called the cops on the police commander? For the first year, my life in Oakwood Preserve was everything I had hoped for. After 2 decades of navigating the controlled chaos of the city as a police officer, rising through the ranks to commander, all I wanted was quiet. I craved the kind of anonymity that a bustling city precinct could never offer. This neighborhood, with its rows of identical beige houses and lawns so green they looked artificial, promised a life of peaceful obscurity. It was a place where my biggest decision on a Saturday should be whether to mow the lawn or fire up the grill. I intentionally kept my profession to myself. I wasn't Commander Mark here. I was just Mark, the quiet guy in 112 Arbor Street who drove a 10-year-old sedan and wore faded jeans on the weekend. My uniform, my badge, and the weight of my job were locked away, separate from this carefully constructed sanctuary. My days fell into a comfortable, predictable rhythm. I'd wake with the sun, enjoy a coffee on my back patio overlooking a small, meticulously cared-for garden, and feel the tension from my work week melt away. I followed the Homeowners Association rules to the letter. My lawn was always trimmed, my garbage bins were promptly hidden from view, and my holiday decorations were understated and HOA approved. I wasn't looking to make friends, but I wasn't looking to make enemies either. A polite nod to the neighbors walking their dogs, a friendly wave to the family across the street, that was the extent of my social interaction, and it was perfect. I was a ghost, a model resident who paid his dues on time and asked for nothing in return but the peace he was promised. This quiet existence was my reward, the prize I'd earned after years of dealing with the worst of humanity. But peace, I would soon learn, is a fragile thing. The first hints of trouble didn't come from a dramatic confrontation, but from the glossy pages of the monthly HOA newsletter. It was managed by a woman across the street named Carol. I knew her only by sight, a woman with a perfectly coiffed helmet of blonde hair and eyes that seemed to scan every property for imperfections. The newsletters started with friendly reminders but quickly evolved. They became decrees, filled with passive-aggressive warnings about unapproved garden gnomes and lengthy diatribes on the precise shade of white permitted for window trim. It was clear the HOA wasn't a community board, it was a kingdom, and Carol was its undisputed queen. Her son was the prince. A boy of about 16, he carried himself with an unearned swagger, as if the entire neighborhood was his personal playground. He'd walk down the middle of the street, forcing cars to drive around him, and leave a trail of empty snack bags and soda cans in his wake. I'd seen him sneer at elderly residents and kick garden decorations on his way past. He acted with total impunity, protected by his mother's reign. The other neighbors would just sigh and pick up his trash, their silence a testament to Carol's iron-fisted control. Any complaint against the prince would be a declaration of war against the queen, and no one wanted to be on the receiving end of her petty wrath. My first direct taste of it was a violation notice left on my door. My offense? My garbage bin was allegedly still visible from the street at 9:07 a.m., a full 7 minutes past the mandated deadline. It was absurd, but I complied without a word. A few weeks later, another notice appeared, this one a warning that the vibrant blue flowers I'd planted near my mailbox were not on the pre-approved list of flora. I saw Carol watching from her living room window as I read it, a faint, triumphant smirk on her face. There was no discussion, no friendly request. Only the cold, impersonal judgment of the HOA, delivered through her. I realized then that the rules weren't about maintaining order, they were about wielding power. Her son's entitlement wasn't just teenage arrogance. It was a learned behavior, inherited from a mother who believed her trivial authority made her a titan. This neighborhood wasn't a sanctuary, it was a fiefdom, and I was just another peasant. I tried to brush off the growing unease, telling myself it was just petty politics. I decided to focus on my weekend, to let it go. And so, that Saturday, I headed out to do my weekly grocery shopping, completely unaware that I was about to cross a line that would shatter this community's perfect, fragile facade. The mulch was the turning point. After receiving the violation notice for my unapproved blue flowers, a transgression I remedied by dutifully digging them up and replacing them with sterile, board-approved white petunias, I thought I had demonstrated my willingness to comply. I was wrong. A week later, another crisp envelope was taped to my front door. Inside, a formal letter informed me that the dark brown cedar mulch I'd used in the flowerbed was an unapproved shade, creating significant aesthetic discord with the neighborhood's established palette. A $100 fine was attached. I stood there, the letter in my hand, and stared at the mulch. It was just mulch. The kind you buy at any home improvement store. The sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it almost made me laugh. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was a message. From my window, I could see Carol across the street, pretending to prune an already perfect rosebush, her eyes darting towards my house. She was watching for my reaction. My police training kicked in, and for a moment, I wasn't just a frustrated homeowner. I was an analyst profiling a subject. This woman didn't thrive on order, she thrived on control. Every violation notice, every petty fine, was a confirmation of her power in the tiny world she ruled. Her son Kevin seemed to have learned this lesson well. I'd see him lounging on their porch, his expression a mirror of his mother's smug superiority, as if my very existence was an affront to his birthright. I paid the fine. In my mind, I categorized it as a nuisance tax, the cost of trying to maintain peace with an unstable dictator. I went to the store, bought a bag of approved reddish-brown mulch, and spent a Saturday afternoon replacing it, feeling more ridiculous than I ever had in my life. As I worked, I felt her eyes on me, a constant, oppressive scrutiny. The peace I had moved here for was already beginning to feel like a distant memory. I finished the job, satisfying her insane demand, but I knew with a cold certainty that this was far from over. Her gaze had already shifted to the gas grill on my back patio, and a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. My breaking point arrived 2 weeks later, disguised as a friendly barbecue. I had invited 3 of my oldest colleagues from the force over for a quiet Saturday afternoon. These were men I'd been through hell and back with, and the gathering was a rare chance to decompress. We were in the backyard, grilling burgers, telling old stories, all of us in shorts and t-shirts. It was the most normal, peaceful afternoon I'd had in months. But we were being watched. Less than an hour in, my phone buzzed with an email notification from the HOA. It was a formal complaint, citing excessive and acrid smoke originating from my property. It also included a thinly veiled threat, reminding me that all gatherings of more than 4 non-residents required a permit from the HOA board, which had to be applied for 2 weeks in advance. Attached was a $250 fine. The email was timestamped just moments before. She had been waiting, watching for me to make a single misstep. The smoke complaint was a fabrication. It was a gas grill, and the breeze was blowing the other way. The unauthorized gathering rule was a weapon, designed to isolate residents and control their personal lives. My friends, all seasoned detectives, noticed the immediate shift in my demeanor. "What's wrong, Mark?" one asked. I showed him the email. He whistled. "This lady's got a real fixation on you. You should run a background check." I immediately shut that down. "No," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "This is my home life. I'm not bringing my job into it." But the line was becoming blurry. My home was no longer a refuge, it was a battleground, and I was losing. The next morning, I saw Carol speaking with another neighbor, pointing animatedly at my house. She was building a narrative, painting me as the disruptive new resident, the troublemaker. Her campaign was methodical. The isolation, the constant surveillance, the baseless fines, it was a textbook strategy of psychological harassment. The tranquility I had paid a premium for was gone, replaced by a constant, humming anxiety. The Queen was turning the village against me, and I knew I couldn't just keep paying her taxes. I spent that entire Sunday poring over the thick, convoluted HOA bylaws, searching for a way to fight back on her terms. I found it, a clause that guaranteed every resident the right to appeal a fine at the monthly board meeting. I would confront her, but not as a commander. I would do it as a homeowner, using the very rules she hid behind. The HOA meeting was a masterclass in performative democracy. It was held in a soulless community clubhouse, with stale coffee and a palpable sense of resignation in the air. Only 7 other residents had shown up, their faces etched with the same weary frustration I felt. Carol sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 other board members who looked less like her colleagues and more like her hostages. When my appeal was called, I stood and calmly began to state my case, presenting the facts about the gas grill and the private nature of my small get-together. I never got to finish a sentence. Carol cut me off at every turn, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. She referred to my friends as a disruptive element, and presented blurry, pixelated photos she had taken from her upstairs window, a gross invasion of my privacy, as evidence. She claimed to have received numerous anonymous complaints from other neighbors about the noise and smoke, a claim I knew was an outright lie. It was my word against hers, and in this room her word was law. The two board members stared blankly at the table, refusing to make eye contact. The vote to uphold the fine was unanimous. It was over in less than 5 minutes. As I walked out of the clubhouse, the warm evening air feeling thick with humiliation, Carol's son Kevin was leaning against the wall, smirking. "Tough break," he said, his voice oozing with mockery. "Guess you should learn to follow the rules, buddy." That was it. The condescending tone, the inherited arrogance, the sheer injustice of it all. It coalesced into a single moment of cold, hard clarity. My strategy had failed. Logic had failed. Appeasement had only emboldened them. I had been so committed to keeping my professional life separate that I had allowed myself to become a victim in my own home. The anger I felt wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and sharp, the kind that clarifies your thoughts and focuses your will. The constant harassment, the manufactured violations, the public sham of a meeting, it was a pattern. And I knew how to break patterns. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew I could no longer afford to be just Mark, the quiet neighbor. The situation required a commander. Lost in thought, I got into my car. All I wanted was to do something mundane, to escape the suffocating politics of this neighborhood for just an hour. I decided to go to the grocery store, completely unaware that the Prince of Oakwood Preserve was heading to the exact same place, on a collision course that would change everything. The grocery store was an oasis of anonymous normalcy. Under the hum of the fluorescent lights, surrounded by the gentle squeak of cart wheels and the distant murmur of checkout scanners, I was no one. I was just another man pushing a cart on a Saturday, trying to decide between whole wheat and sourdough. After the calculated humiliation of the HOA meeting, this mundane task felt like a form of therapy. I was mentally outlining a new strategy, a more formal approach to dealing with Carol, but for a moment I could just focus on the simple, tangible reality of stocking my pantry. The peace I craved wasn't in my home anymore, but I had found a fragile, temporary version of it here in aisle 7. That peace shattered when I turned into the snack aisle and saw him. Kevin was standing there, his eyes locking onto mine with an unnerving intensity. I gave him a curt, dismissive nod and tried to steer my cart past him. I had no desire to engage, no energy for another confrontation. But he wasn't going to let it go. He took a deliberate step sideways, blocking my path. His posture was arrogant, his expression a perfect imitation of his mother's condescending superiority. He didn't look at me, he looked into my cart. He pointed a lazy finger at a large family-sized bag of kettle-cooked potato chips. He didn't ask for them. He didn't offer to pay. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple jeans and faded polo shirt, and then he spoke. His words were quiet, yet they echoed in the silent aisle, laced with a casual, venomous racism. He told me that I should give him the chips. He said that people like him, people who belonged in a neighborhood like Oakwood Preserve, deserved things. The implication was clear. People like me did not. It was a staggering moment of learned hatred, a grotesque reflection of his mother's prejudice, now given a voice. I was frozen for a second, not by fear but by the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it all. I found my voice and it was colder than I expected. I told him no, and I told him to move out of my way. The smirk on his face widened. This was what he wanted, a reaction. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving expertly across the screen. I watched, my blood turning to ice as he called his mother. His voice, suddenly high-pitched and panicked, was a work of fiction. He told her he was at the grocery store and that the man from Arbor Street was harassing him, that he was being threatened. I could hear Carol's frantic squawking through the tiny speaker before he hung up. I tried to leave, to simply abandon the aisle and the entire confrontation, but I was too late. Within what felt like seconds, Carol appeared at the end of the aisle, her face a thunderous mask of righteous fury. She didn't stop to ask questions or assess the situation. She launched herself forward, her voice a shrill weapon. She accused me of stalking her son, of being a menace to the community. Shoppers began to stop, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. This was her new stage, and she was playing the lead role of the victimized mother protecting her child. I stood my ground, my hands gripping the handle of my cart. I told her she was wrong, that her son had instigated the entire event. My calmness only seemed to fuel her rage. It was a stark contrast, her wild, gesticulating hysteria against my rigid, controlled silence, and it was drawing a crowd. "I'm calling the police," she shrieked, making sure everyone could hear her. "We'll see who's right when they get here." She fumbled for her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen. I felt a profound sense of inevitability wash over me. This was it. The line had been crossed. The one boundary I had desperately tried to maintain, the separation between my private life and my professional identity, was about to be obliterated by this woman's malicious fantasy. I listened as she spoke to the 911 dispatcher, feeding them a narrative of lies. She described me as an unstable, aggressive predator, using my calm demeanor as proof of my cold, calculating nature. She painted a picture of a dangerous man so the police response would be fast and heavy. The store manager finally arrived, a young man who looked completely overwhelmed, asking us to please calm down. But Carol was beyond reason. She had an audience and she had a target. She was going to see me humiliated, and this time she was using the full power of the law to do it. The arrival of the two uniformed officers was swift. They were young, alert, and professional, their eyes scanning the scene. A hysterical woman pointing a trembling finger, a sullen teenager trying to look innocent, and me, a man standing silently beside a grocery cart filled with bread, milk, and a bag of potato chips. The senior officer, a man named Evans whose record I had personally reviewed and commended a few months prior, approached me. "Sir," he began, his voice polite but firm, "we've received a complaint. I need you to step over here and talk with us." Behind him, I could see Carol's triumphant smirk. She had won. The authorities were here and they were here for me. This was the moment. I took a slow breath and looked at Officer Evans. He didn't recognize me. In my weekend attire, I was just another civilian, another potential suspect. I didn't reach for a wallet or a badge. I simply met his gaze and spoke, my voice devoid of anger, holding only the quiet, unshakable weight of authority. "My name," I said clearly and evenly, "is Mark Reeves." I paused for a beat, letting my name hang in the air, and then I delivered the final blow to Carol's reality. "I'm the city's police commander." Time seemed to slow down. I watched the progression of understanding dawn on Officer Evans' face. First confusion, then a flicker of disbelief, followed by a sudden wide-eyed jolt of absolute recognition. His entire posture changed. His shoulders straightened, his professional caution replaced by a rigid, military deference. "Commander?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. His partner's eyes went wide. The store manager, who had been hovering nearby, took an involuntary step back. The whispers from the crowd of onlookers grew louder. Carol, however, was still lost in her own delusion. She let out a sharp, ugly laugh. "A police commander? You?" She turned to the officers, her voice dripping with scorn. "Don't listen to him. He's a liar. He's impersonating an officer on top of everything else. Arrest him." But Officer Evans wasn't listening to her. He wasn't even looking at her. His eyes were locked on mine, waiting. "Sir," he said, his voice now formal and clear, cutting through Carol's ranting. "What are your orders?" I didn't answer him. Instead, I looked past his shoulder, directly at Carol. I watched her face as the officer's question finally pierced through her hysteria. I watched as her triumphant smile faltered, contorted, and then completely dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pale, dawning horror. The foundation of her world, built on petty rules and false power, had just been pulverized. And in the ringing silence that followed, she finally understood she hadn't just called the cops on her neighbor, she had summoned them on her boss. The silence in the snack aisle was a living thing, thick and heavy with shattered illusions. Carol's face, which had been a mask of venomous rage just moments before, was now a canvas of collapsing realities. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. Her son, Kevin, seemed to shrink, his entitled swagger evaporating into the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere, leaving behind only the frightened, petulant child he truly was. Officer Evans, recovering his professional composure with remarkable speed, turned to his partner. His voice was low and controlled. "Secure the scene," he commanded, then turned his attention back to me, his expression a mixture of profound apology and unwavering respect. "Commander, I am so sorry for this. What are your instructions?" I held up a hand. "Just do your job, Evans," I said, my voice calm and even. "Take a statement from everyone. Her son, the store manager, any witnesses who are willing. And make sure you file a full and accurate report, including the details of the 911 call." I then looked directly at Carol, whose eyes were wide with a terror I'd seen many times before. The terror of someone who has just realized their lies have led them to a cliff's edge. "I will not be pressing charges for harassment," I stated, letting the words land with precision. But misusing the 911 emergency system and filing a false police report are not matters of my personal discretion. That is an abuse of a city resource. The district attorney's office will decide how to proceed with that. The last glimmer of hope in her eyes died. She understood. I wasn't going to engage in a petty war of revenge. I was simply stepping out of the way and letting the impartial machinery of the law, the very system she had tried to weaponize, roll forward on its own inexorable path. The officers calmly and professionally began their work, separating a now sobbing Carol from her stunned son. I paid for my groceries, including the infamous bag of chips, and walked out of the store, leaving the wreckage of Carol's reign behind me under the fluorescent lights. News in a place like Oakwood Preserve doesn't travel, it teleports. By the time I had unloaded my groceries, the story was already spreading, mutating with each telling, but the core truth remained the same. Carol, the HOA queen, had called the cops on the police commander. The community's reaction was not what I expected. There was no fear, no sudden rush to get on my good side. Instead, there was an almost audible, collective sigh of relief. It was as if a spell had been broken. That evening, my next-door neighbor, an elderly man I'd only ever shared polite nods with, came over with a plate of homemade cookies. He told me how Carol had fined him $300 for having a bird bath she deemed unsightly. Later, the family across the street stopped by, recounting their own story of being cited for their children's sidewalk chalk art. My home, once a target of isolation, had become a center of quiet rebellion. The fear Carol had cultivated for years had been built on the illusion of absolute power, and with one disastrous 911 call, I had inadvertently proven that illusion to be hollow. The legal consequences for Carol were swift and impersonal. The DA, seeing a clear-cut case of filing a false police report and misusing emergency services, charged her. Given her lack of a prior record, she wasn't facing jail time, but the penalty was for her far worse. A substantial fine, mandatory community service, and a court-ordered public apology. The public apology was delivered at the next HOA meeting, and it was a spectacle of utter humiliation. The community clubhouse was packed, standing room only. Carol stood at the podium, a woman utterly defeated, and read a stilted, lawyer-approved statement acknowledging her false accusations. There was no applause, no jeering. Just a heavy, damning silence. When she finished, she didn't return to her seat at the head of the table. She shuffled out of the room, a pariah in the kingdom she had built. In that moment, the HOA was reborn. One by one, residents stood up, not to attack Carol but to dismantle her legacy. They proposed motions to review the bylaws, to abolish the absurdly restrictive rules, and to install a new board based on genuine community representation. The fallout extended to her son. The official police report, which I had insisted be meticulously detailed, included Kevin's racist and provocative language. It led to a formal complaint being filed with his school. He wasn't expelled, but he was suspended and mandated to attend a series of diversity and sensitivity counseling sessions. The shield of his mother's perceived power was gone, and for the first time in his life, he was forced to confront the consequences of his own actions. I would see him around the neighborhood occasionally, no longer swaggering down the middle of the street. He now walked on the sidewalk, his eyes downcast, a boy stripped of his unearned arrogance. The house with the perfectly pruned rosebushes became quiet. Carol resigned from the board immediately after her apology. A for sale sign appeared on their pristine lawn less than a month later. They moved away not with a bang, but with the quiet, ignominious whisper of a moving truck disappearing down the street before dawn. In their absence, the neighborhood began to breathe again. The bland, uniform beige of fear was replaced by the vibrant colors of individuality. The neighbor's bird bath returned. Sidewalks became canvases for children's art once more. My own unapproved blue flowers were replanted by my mailbox, a small but significant symbol of the new era. I was no longer just the quiet man in 112 Arbor Street. My identity was known, but it didn't create the barrier I had feared. Instead, it became a strange kind of bridge. People would ask for advice, not on legal loopholes, but on neighborhood watch programs or how to best secure their homes. I became a resource, a neighbor, finally a part of the community, not by following oppressive rules, but by helping to restore common sense. The quiet I had sought was finally mine, not the fragile quiet of anonymity, but the resilient, earned quiet of a community at peace. It's a strange thing, power. Some, like Carol, see it as a weapon to be wielded, a tool to enforce their will on others and feed their own insecurities. They build their tiny empires on foundations of fear and petty rules, and for a time, it can seem unassailable. but that kind of power is a brittle facade. True authority isn't about the title you hold or the rules you can enforce. It's about responsibility, restraint, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth without needing to diminish others. Carol and I both held positions of power, but she used hers to break a community, while I was forced to use mine to let that community heal itself. She weaponized the law out of spite and in the end was judged by that same law, impartially and irrevocably. So, it leaves you with a question. What is the real difference between a ruler and a bully? And what happens when a bully, accustomed to intimidating everyone in their path, finally picks a fight with someone who simply refuses to be moved?